Hey, this is Nicole Kelly, host of Disarming Disability. Thanks for listening to the following show on Public House Media.
This is Catch Up, an official news production of Public House Media.
It's June 3rd, 2020, and it's time to catch up on the news that you need to know about.
Today, we're helping you catch up on the comments made by presidential candidate Joe Biden on the national protests of police brutality and the murder of George Floyd.
President Trump's announcement to pull the United States out of the WHO.
Notre Dame-Navy decided to move their August football game from Ireland to Annapolis.
And a mother-daughter team helping to keep deaf and hard-of-hearing people stay safe during the pandemic.
We're your hosts, Catherine Smith.
And I'm Dan Kotnick. Welcome to Catch Up.
Presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden delivered a speech yesterday in Philadelphia denouncing the Trump administration handling of and response to countrywide protests of racial injustices and police brutality. It was the former vice president's first time appearing outside of Delaware since mid-March, when the COVID-19 pandemic spurred widespread restrictions. In the speech, Biden specifically pointed to peaceful protests being cleared from in front of the White House with tear gas and flashbang grenades to allow President Trump to visit a nearby church for the photo op. We bring in catch-up political correspondent Bryce Berg to discuss. So what does this exactly mean moving forward when it comes to Joe Biden's presidential nominee and in comparison to Donald Trump?
Well, right now, it really just shows that these two presidential candidates are on opposite sides of the aisle on this issue, where Trump has taken a hard-nosed line that has really rallied his base right now. Biden's attack on the way that Trump has handled this and the way that he's integrated the policies that he wants to be mandated, I guess, would be the best phrase, along in each state really kind of shows a lot of the different approaches to what matters to each candidate when dealing with protests like this. When Biden went up there, he talked a lot about self-accountability, what kind of leadership model that he would provide as president, and how that differed from the way that Trump has currently handled things. But for some people, it was viewed as overly political or just pandering to the people that were already against Trump. And people even left of what Biden typically goes with says that it wasn't far enough, that what his policies and potential change, like a federal oversight police board, ending chokeholds, they don't do enough for things like charging police officers with crimes, or for those that purposely inhibit body cams or things of that nature. As that kind of comes along, it really does have an impact of whether or not this was something that was for the country or this was something that was going to be better for his political campaign. And since this was his first major appearance since the COVID-19 pandemic came around, it was one that was viewed as very presidential by a lot of people on the left and very overly political by his opponents. So it doesn't necessarily bring a surprise to people that are down the middle.
Bryce, you kind of mentioned the health of his presidential campaign at the moment, and it took a bit of a hit, especially on social media, as this situation was kind of breaking around the country with one of his vice president candidates or potential candidates, people calling Amy Klobuchar probably one of the front runners for that. It came up that she, had a little bit more involvement in the situation that was taking place in Minneapolis years before, and kind of the criticism around her and the job that she did in her role before joining the Senate. Do you think that this speech in any way is an attempt to kind of distance himself from that kind of story, or even just her as a candidate in general?
I think both, but again, it goes down to what's the level of effectiveness in his approach to it. He didn't mention Klobuchar by name, who multiple times gave a pass to the alleged informality only killer and murderer of George Floyd and the former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. So when Klobuchar was the Hennepin County prosecutor. So again, that kind of goes to the people that were leaning further left than what the standard Democratic view is right now. It did not give him any favors to ignore that. But I think the fact that it was not mentioned as her as an ally or doing anything good, I think finally closes the door on what would have been probably one of the more safety net opportunities for a vice presidential candidate in the former Hennepin County prosecutor and senator from Minnesota. It does kind of help the political gamesmanship of trying to figure out who that potential candidate will be now, whether it's going to be a different prosecutor like Harris. And I think that might have an impact now, is if you are getting away from one prosecutor, are all prosecutors too toxic to try to bring on? That might have an impact on whether Kamala Harris would be a vice president candidate. But I think right now, when it comes down to putting a good foot forward for Biden was looking at making sure that he made a strong, impactful statement. And at least in terms of understanding the concerns about police brutality and rioting and race relations, he put a good foot forward for himself, which was very clear and important, given that this was his first appearance outside of Delaware in almost 2 months. He has been falling behind just because of that incumbent aspect and the pandemic aspect. It kind of puts him behind the 8 ball. Even though that he is a presumptive nominee, he is not officially the nominee, and he cannot campaign in that way in all logistic possibilities. So for him to have that little bit of a lesser time in front of the cameras or involved in issues across the country, it was important for him to put a good foot forward. And I think by separating himself from Klobuchar and separating himself from any previous ties to the Minneapolis law enforcement community as a whole was something that he could do to start escaping the shadow.
Thank you so much, Bryce, for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
President Trump announced at a Friday press conference that the United States would be ending its relationship with the World Health Organization, including halting funding and the country's membership in the organization. This comes a week after the president gave the organization a 30-day timeline to make undisclosed changes and reforms to how the WHO operates, which the Trump administration has said favors countries like China. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of the organization, responded Monday that, quote, the United States government's and its people's contribution and generosity toward global health over many decades has been immense, and it has made a great difference in public health all around the world. It is WHO's wish for this collaboration to continue, end quote. The United States was one of the countries that spearheaded the creation of the organization in 1948 and contributes $450 million annually, according to the White House. The decision to withdraw has been met with criticism in the global health community, both here and abroad, while some argue that President Trump doesn't have the authority to make such a decision without approval from Congress. This is a story that's continuing to develop in the following weeks, so stay with us here and on social media channels for more updates as they come.
As other major sports leagues worldwide make changes to their season to accommodate around the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the first to affect college football was announced yesterday, as the Notre Dame and Navy football teams have announced their August 29th game, originally scheduled to be played in Dublin, will be played at the Navy Marines Corps Memorial Stadium in Annapolis. It marks the first time in 94 years of the series between the programs the game will be played at the Navy's campus, with the previous games all being played either at Notre Dame or the neutral site. The event, which will now mostly likely be played on Labor Day weekend, was expected to have close to 40,000 fans from the U.S. traveling to Dublin. We're joined by catch-up news correspondent Kamari Darrington to discuss what might have been from this college football game this year. Kamari, can you please explain to us a little bit what to expect when it comes to this game? And is it going to be similar to what we've expected in previous years when it comes to sports?
Well, it might be. This is one of the longest rivalries in college football. I believe it's the longest continuous rivalry in college football. 94 years of history between these two schools. And I think what's going to end up happening is because the NCAA doesn't have an official timetable to return to the football field, I think you're going to see maybe a few more of these neutral site games maybe moved to campus sites just to limit the amount of people coming into these different areas. The Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium holds about 40,000 people, and that's how many people were expected to come from the United States to go over to Dublin, Ireland, and play at Aviva Stadium. This would have been the third time that those two teams were playing in Ireland. So it could be a similar situation, but just like with everything else with COVID-19, everything is up in the air. I think it's a good idea for them to move the game because the international travel is pretty much almost non-existent at this point. And so it's a good move by the two schools. I know it's disappointing, but certainly they can always come back. And I think it's obviously a historic moment in Annapolis to have the game there in Annapolis as opposed to having a game, at a neutral site. Or I think Baltimore was also considered for the game to be played there. But to have the game in Annapolis and kind of the intimate setting that they'll have there, it's going to be great for the rivalry. And I think it'll keep future games at the stadium if things go well, at least this first time.
Kamari, do you, in your opinion, is this a arbiter for what we might see with more college sports in general in the next couple of months? Because like you said, the NCAA, it really doesn't have a timetable yet of how to deal with the upcoming football season. That's obviously the biggest one to come up on the calendar next. So this is really the first shoe to drop in this whole situation. So do you think that this is the start of something that we might see in the next month or so, not even just with football, but with other big tournaments for non-revenue sports and even basketball as it tries to come back after not finishing its season last year?
Well, I believe that you're looking at a situation where everyone is waiting to see what health officials are going to say, if there are any plans in place to test players and test any administrators or coaches that are going to be in attendance at games. And also the fact that, are you going to have fans at games? So a lot of this is logistical at this point. I think just with everything else that's starting to come back, we've seen Bundesliga soccer come back in the last couple of months. NASCAR started to come back. So you're starting to see live sports return to the lexicon. And I think just with everything else, it's just a wait and see process because all plans have to be in place and there's no really uniformity as far as how these plans are going to be taken, how these plans are going to take place. So I think with these other non-revenue sports or with basketball, I think we're going to have to see what happens during the football season and how players and fans, when they come back to the stadium, react to things that are going on.
Well, it sounds like that we're going to have a possibly supportive sports season when it comes to this upcoming year. Thank you, Kamari, for joining us on Catch Up today.
Thank you for having me.
Countless people around the country and world have taken up the task of creating homemade masks to help friends, family, and others prevent the spread of COVID-19. But one mother in particular is doing something to help make these necessary products more accommodating for the deaf and hard of hearing community. Justine Bate of Manchester, England, along with her daughter, Tiana, have been working on creating masks that include a clear plastic window that allow the mouth to be seen, allowing for those who are hard of hearing or deaf, just like Justine and Tiana are, to read lips and communicate better. Justine said that they've been swamped with orders for masks from all over the globe, including, in particular, from nursing homes and special care facilities who say the masks actually help patients with dementia and certain types of autism, where caregivers wearing a mask may unduly scare or stress patients. So, Catherine, overall, a very heartwarming story and bringing light to a situation that I think maybe we didn't really think about.
I think at the end of the day, it's a great opportunity for people who are possibly more disadvantaged than those that we think of ourselves. And I don't think that we necessarily think about it when it comes to wearing a mask on how disadvantaged other individuals are, especially if they're hard of hearing or possibly could be deaf or in the deaf community. And so I think at the end of the day, just allowing us to be more inclusive when it comes to our community is very important. Thanks for joining Catch Up today with us. I'm Catherine Smith.
And I'm Dan Connick. Please be sure to catch up with us again tomorrow.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
We appreciate you listening to Catch Up. For even more content, follow Catch Up Digital on social media. Just search for @TimeForCatchup.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the stories that we covered today. Just use the hashtag #PassTheCatchup on social media.
Catch Up is an official production of Public House Media.